There is a specific kind of political moment that does not announce itself before it arrives. It does not come with a warning label or a production cue. It simply happens in real time in front of an audience that came expecting one thing and received something else entirely. Something that forces them to sit back slightly in their seats and recalibrate what they thought they understood about the two people standing on the stage in front of them. This was that kind of moment, and it began, as the most revealing political moments often do, with someone making a serious miscalculation about the person they were attacking. Outside the debate hall, the energy had been building for hours before the doors opened. Hundreds of people pressed against the police barricades in the cold evening air. On one side, Trump supporters in red hats, some of them hoarse already from chanting, their energy high and certain and pointed like a weapon. On the other side, Harris supporters with signs and voices equally determined, pushing back with the specific force of people who feel they have something worth protecting. The security perimeter held, but barely. The noise carried for blocks. Inside, the tension was different in quality, not louder, denser, the kind that sits in the air of a confined space when several hundred people are simultaneously running high on anticipation and have nowhere to direct it yet. Every seat was filled, cameras positioned at every angle, moderators at their table, looking exactly like people who understand they are about to referee something that may not stay within the boundaries they are prepared for. Trump came out first. The swagger was familiar. Shoulders back, chin elevated, the measured, slow walk of someone who has spent decades practicing a specific entrance that communicates ownership of whatever room he enters. The red tie, the wave, the smirk directed at the section of the room that responded with the noise he expected from them. He moved to his podium and settled in with the ease of someone who has done this many times and does not intend to be surprised. Harris came out seconds later. The contrast was immediate and deliberate in its own way. She walked at a pace that communicated nothing rushed and nothing performed. Steady, purposeful, the kind of composure that comes not from effort, but from having made a decision before entering a room about exactly what kind of presence you intend to maintain regardless of what happens once you are inside it. She took her place at her podium, and for a brief moment, both of them were still. Their eyes met across the stage. Not friendly, not theatrical. The specific look of two people who understand completely what the next 90 minutes represent and have both already decided how they intend to approach it. The moderator opened. The first topics arrived. Economy, jobs, inflation, the usual architecture of a presidential debate in the early sections, when both candidates are still operating within the structure that the format provides and the real pressure has not yet arrived. Trump was loud and confident, hitting his points with the rhythm of someone who has delivered them so many times they come out without effort. Harris was measured and direct, answering with the precision of someone who has prepared not just the statements, but the specific way each statement should land. The borders topic brought the first real heat. Trump went hard and fast. Harris went back equally fast. The exchanges were sharp and quick, and the crowd reacted to each one with the specific energy of an audience that has already divided itself and is watching its chosen side like it is watching a sport. And then, in the space of a single sentence, the nature of the evening changed. Trump leaned forward on his podium. The movement was subtle but visible to everyone in the hall because it carried a specific quality of preparation. The way a person leans forward when they have decided to say something they have been holding and have finally decided to release. The smile shifted, not gone, but different. The political fighter's expression, replaced by something that lived closer to the schoolyard. Something that had less to do with the debate and more to do with a personal decision he had made about the person standing across the stage from him. He said, his voice beginning the characteristic modulation from debate register to rally register. It's really something. We're supposed to take lectures from Kamala Harris about families, about values, about what's best for America. He paused for exactly the length of time that signals a landing zone is being prepared. But let's be real here, folks. How does someone talk about family stability when they can't even keep their own house together? He laughed, the full, booming laugh that fills whatever space it enters. The laugh that his crowds respond to because it carries a specific signal of someone who thinks he has just said something devastating and is giving permission for everyone else to respond. I mean, come on. How many times has she been married? 2? 3. What happened there, Kamala? Did those not work out? Maybe we should talk about that instead of listening to her plans for the country. Trump's section of the crowd reacted immediately. Laughter, applause, a few people standing. The specific energy of an audience that has been handed what feels like a weapon and is responding to the weight of it in their hand. The other side of the room went silent in the specific way that rooms go silent when something has been said that lands not as a debate point but as an assault. Faces tightened, jaws clenched. People who had been leaning forward in anticipation sat back slightly, recalibrating the nature of what they were watching. Trump was not finished. He was in the groove now, feeding off the energy of the responding half of the room, and he pushed further the way people push when they believe they are accelerating toward an advantage. How many times have you been married, Kamala? Seriously, the American people deserve to know. You want to lecture us about the future of our families, but you've got your own messy history. Maybe fix that first before telling everyone else how to live. He repeated the question, louder, more mocking, with the specific emphasis of someone who has decided that repetition is going to do the work he wants it to do. This is the same woman who wants to be in charge of the most powerful country in the world, but she can't even make a marriage last. That tells you everything you need to know about her judgment. Kamala Harris stood motionless behind her podium through all of it. She did not interrupt. She did not roll her eyes or sigh or give a camera any of the small reactions that debate coaches spend weeks trying to coach candidates out of. She did not lean toward her microphone to signal impatience. She did not look at the moderators with the expression of someone appealing for intervention. She watched Trump. That was all. She watched him the way someone watches a process that they understand and are waiting for it to complete itself on its own terms. Her face gave nothing away except the quality of attention so sustained and unbroken that it communicated to everyone in the hall who was watching her watch him that she was not surprised by any of this and had already decided exactly what she was going to do when it was her turn to speak. Trump went one more time, his voice shifting even further into the mocking register, dragging out each word for maximum theatrical effect. Tell us, Kamala, what happened to your marriages? The American people deserve the truth. The challenge hung in the air. The entire hall fell quiet. Every eye moved from Trump to Harris, waiting for the response that would either absorb the attack or return it. Harris leaned toward the microphone, slowly, without urgency. Her voice, when it came, was calm and clear and completely without heat. The specific temperature of someone who has thought carefully about what they're going to say and has decided that the words themselves are sufficient, that adding temperature to them would only dilute them. You know, Donald, she said, it is truly something to watch a man who has spent decades treating women like objects suddenly try to lecture the country about family values and marriage. The hall went quiet in the way that follows a statement that changes the terms of what is happening. Harris continued without varying her pace or her tone. You want to question my personal life? Let's establish some standards first. You have bragged on the record about grabbing women without their permission because you are a star. You have called women pigs, dogs, and disgusting animals on the record. You have rated women on a scale of 1 to 10 in public, in interviews, across decades of public statements, like they were products being evaluated for purchase. And now you are standing here, in front of the country, presenting yourself as a champion of traditional family values? She looked directly at him. That is not leadership. That is hypocrisy. And the American people can see the difference. Gasps moved the crowd in the same rolling pattern that physical waves move across water, starting close to the stage and spreading outward to the rows until they hit the back wall and had nowhere left to go. Harris had not raised her voice once. You have been married 3 times, she continued. You have said publicly in multiple interviews that marriage is essentially a business arrangement that you exit when it no longer suits your interests. You have described your own relationships in transactional language that leaves nothing ambiguous about how you regard the institution you are now attempting to use as a weapon against me. She paused. Let that settle. So please, spare the American people the lecture about your commitment to family values. They can read. They can watch the tape. The record is available to anyone who wants to look. Trump's smirk had gone. His hands had found the edges of the podium and were gripping them. The color in his face was rising. The composure that usually allows him to absorb attacks and redirect them was visibly struggling with what Harris was doing, which was not attacking him the way he had been prepared to receive. She was simply reading from the documented record in a calm voice with no apparent anger. And there is no effective defense against that specific approach because it has nothing to argue with. It is only facts. And the facts were not moving. "You attacked my marriage," Harris said, her voice still carrying that same even quality, "because you have nothing substantive to offer on the real issues facing American families. The cost of groceries, health care, the safety of their communities. These are the things families actually lie awake worrying about. And real leadership means showing up to address those things with honesty and with character, not tearing people down because you cannot win on the substance." Trump slammed his fist on the podium. The sound came to the microphones clearly, that dense, physical thud that communicates a person has reached the edge of their available patience. "That's enough," he shouted. "You're the one who should be ashamed. Kamala, don't you dare try to flip this around on me. You're a disaster." Harris did not flinch. She did not move back from the microphone or adjust her posture in any way that suggested she had been affected by the volume or the anger. She looked at him directly. "Since we are talking about family values, Donald," she said, "let's talk about yours." The room somehow went quieter than it had been a moment before. The specific quiet that collects when an audience senses that something is about to be said that cannot be unsaid. "You gave an interview in 2006 in which you stated, and I am quoting you directly, 'If Ivanka weren't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her.' Those are your words on the record, in your own voice. You said them publicly. You have made similar remarks in other contexts over the years. And you want to stand here in front of the country and question the character of my personal life?" The hall absorbed this in a single collective breath. Several hundred people processing the same information at the same time, and the sound that came out of that processing was a wave of gasps and murmurs, and somewhere in the middle a few voices that were not murmuring at all, but speaking at full volume in simple shock. Harris had not finished. And while we were talking about records and accountability, she continued, the same steady cadence. Nothing elevated, nothing theatrical. "Let's talk about Jeffrey Epstein. You once described him publicly as a terrific guy who liked beautiful women, some on the younger side. Those were your words. You made multiple documented trips on his plane. You promised the American people loudly, publicly, repeatedly, that you would release the full Epstein files if you became president. You said it was going to be one of the first things you did. You became president. Not one page was released. Not one document. The files remained sealed. And I want to ask you directly, in front of this audience and this country, why were you protecting? Who are you protecting?" The hall went from shock to chaotic in the span of 3 seconds. Murmurs turned into arguments. Arguments turned into shouting. Phones came up everywhere, recording. Trump's side was on its feet, but not in the way they had been when he was performing. In the agitated, confused way of people who do not have a prepared response to the thing that has just been said and are looking for one in real time. Trump's face had moved past red. His hands were shaking. "That's a lie," he roared, his voice carrying the high edge of someone who has lost control of their breathing. "You are a disgusting liar. How dare you bring my daughter into this? You're sick. You have no right. No right. This is low even for you." He took 2 steps out from behind his podium, physically out into the open space of stage, his arm extended, pointing. Secret Service agents moved before he completed the second step, smoothly, professionally, positioning themselves in the space between him and where his direction of travel was pointed, their presence alone redirecting him back toward his podium without a word being exchanged. At that moment, a man in the front row rose to his feet. Dark suit, the slightly worn look of someone who has spent time inside government buildings. Several reporters in the press section recognized him immediately. A former White House aide who had served in the first administration and had been sitting quietly in a seat that nobody had particularly noticed until the second. His voice came out loud and certain. "I work for him," the man said. "Trump said that about Ivanka. Those exact words. I heard it personally. If she weren't my daughter, I'd be dating her." I was in the room. The hall lost its architecture. What had been an intense but contained debate space became something closer to a public square at the moment when a demonstration breaks open. Trump supporters screamed at the man. Others cheered him. Boos came from multiple directions simultaneously. Security moved into the aisles. The moderators looked at each other with the specific expression of people who prepare for many scenarios and have arrived at one that was not in any of them. Trump was pointing at Harris again, his voice cracking with the specific texture of someone who has crossed the line between controlled anger and genuine rage. "You're finished, Kamala. You're done. This is a witch hunt. You're a lowlife. You have nothing." Harris stood at her podium without moving. The American people deserve honesty, Donald, not more deflection. Trump reached behind him for his chair. He did not sit down. He shoved it backward so hard it hit the stage floor with a sound that the microphones picked up and broadcast through every speaker in the hall. Then he turned from the stage and walked, not toward the moderators, not toward the audience, toward the exit. His footsteps hit the wooden stage floor at the specific pace and force of someone who has made a decision and is executing it before the part of their brain that would counsel against it can catch up. The Secret Service moved with him, forming the protective geometry that surrounds him wherever he goes. But even in that formation, something was visibly different. They were not escorting him in the ordinary sense. They were keeping pace with someone who had stopped making decisions that involved other people's presence or preferences. The microphones were still hot. The entire hall could hear the muttering as he moved toward the backstage corridor. Fragments, repeated words, the acoustics of genuine fury rather than performed anger, which has a different quality that audiences recognize even when they cannot identify exactly why. Then the footsteps faded. Then silence. The kind of silence that descends on a large space when the loudest thing in it is just left and the acoustics are still recalibrating. Several hundred people sitting with their eyes fixed on an empty podium and an abandoned chair lying on its side on the stage floor. Nobody moved for a long moment. Not Trump supporters. Not Harris supporters. Not the moderators. Not the press pool. The shock of what had just happened was operating on everyone simultaneously, regardless of which side they had arrived supporting, because what they had just watched was not a political event in the ordinary sense. It was something more primary than that. A man who had spent decades defining American public life by his refusal to be diminished by anything or anyone had just walked off a stage because a woman had read from his own record in a calm voice. Kamala Harris stood alone. She looked out at the room, at the stunned faces and the phone screens and the people who were still processing and the few who were beginning to find their voices again. Her expression had not changed, not triumphant, not pitying. The quiet confidence of someone who came prepared for exactly this and is still exactly where she intended to be when it was over. She took a slow breath. "I did not come here tonight to trade insults," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the now quiet hall. "I came here to talk about the real issues facing American families. Families who are lying awake because grocery prices are too high and rent is out of reach and healthcare bills are arriving in envelopes they're afraid to open. That is what leadership should be about. That is what tonight should have been about." She paused. But tonight showed us something important instead. When someone is faced with uncomfortable truths about their own record, they have choices. They can address the record. They can acknowledge it. They can argue with it if they believe it is wrong. Or they can walk away from it. What we just saw was a choice of someone who could not defend what was in the folder. So they left the room where the folder was being opened. A ripple of murmurs moved through the audience. Not hostile. Processing. Real leadership requires staying, Harris continued. It requires sitting with difficult questions even when the answers are uncomfortable. It requires showing up for the people you are asking to trust you, especially when it's hard. Especially when the record you are being asked to account for is the one you would prefer to leave undiscussed. Humility is not weakness. Accountability is not defeat. These are the foundations of the character that this office requires. She looked out at the room with the steadiness of someone who is not performing steadiness but simply has it. We saw the difference tonight between noise and strength, between someone who runs when the real questions arrive and someone who stays to answer them. Character is not about volume. It has never been about volume. It is about who is still standing when the pressure is real and the moment is difficult and there is no more bluster left to hide behind. Her voice grew in quality without growing in volume. America does not need more division. It does not need more chaos deliberately manufactured for effect. What it needs, what families across this country are asking for, whether they call themselves Democrats or Republicans or neither, is leadership that treats them as adults. Leadership that tells them the truth about hard things. Leadership that shows up when the cameras are off and the work is not glamorous and the problems do not have easy answers. She paused for the last time. Those are not partisan values. They are American values. And they are the only ones worth organizing a government around. Then the slight smile, delivered to a silent room, in the voice of someone who had just watched the loudest man in the room leave it. Losers leave when a real competitor shows up. The hall did not respond all at once. There was a second, maybe two, of complete stillness. The specific stillness that precedes a very large reaction, where the body of the audience is reading the moment before the response has been chosen. Then the laughter started, first in pockets, then spreading. Then the applause came in behind it, and the two merged and built into the kind of sustained roar that fills a room from floor to ceiling and is not diminished quickly because it is drawing on something deeper than a response to a single line. People who had arrived wearing the red hats. People who had been chanting USA in the plaza 2 hours earlier. Even some of them were on their feet, not necessarily agreeing with everything they had watched, but responding to the specific quality of what they had just witnessed, which was not a political victory in the usual partisan sense, but something more elemental, a demonstration of composure under genuine pressure, a performance of staying in the room when leaving was the easier option. Harris gave a small nod, a calm wave. She did not linger in the moment or let it expand beyond its natural dimensions. She acknowledged it and stood in it and let it be what it was without adding anything to it. The moderator returned to a stage that had been designed for two people and now held one. He cleared his throat. He looked briefly at the empty podium and the chair still lying on its side. He looked back at the audience. "Thank you, Vice President Harris," he said, "and thank you, President Trump, wherever you are now." A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the crowd, the tension breaking along its most available seam. This has certainly been one of the most memorable nights in debate history. He stepped back quickly. The inadequacy of the statement was obvious to everyone, but everyone also understood that there was no statement equal to what had just happened in that room. Sometimes the thing that happened is simply larger than the language available to describe in the moment, and the honest response is to acknowledge that and move on. People began gathering their things and moving toward the exits, but slowly, the way audiences leave when they are not ready to stop talking about what they saw. Phones were already out, already rolling, already uploading. The clips would move the way the best debate moments move, not because someone packaged them strategically, but because they contained something people needed to share with the person next to them immediately. In the corridor outside, a television producer who had been in the room for every presidential debate of the last 20 years stood against the wall watching the crowd file out and said nothing for a long time. Then, to nobody in particular, she said what a lot of people in that building were thinking, but had not yet said out loud. "I have never seen anyone walk off that stage in 50 years of doing this job. Not once." She shook her head, and she didn't even raise her voice to make him do it. Outside, the plaza had gone quiet in the way plazas go quiet when the event that filled them has ended, but the crowd has not fully accepted that it is over. Small groups stood in the cold, talking, replaying what they had watched, trying to locate the moment that felt most definitive in a sequence of moments that had all been competing for that status. The question that moved through those conversations, that the television anchors would spend the next several hours articulating in their various registers, that would appear in the morning papers, and the think pieces, and the analysis that follows any event of sufficient consequence, was not really a political question in the narrow sense. It was the same question that the debate had answered on the stage, quietly, without anyone having to state it directly. When the loudest voice in the room walks away, who is left standing? The answer had been visible to everyone watching. It was the one who never raised hers.